Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our monthly webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about creating checklists for project management success. Now, in full disclosure, so that there's no misunderstanding here, this is my first video webinar because I had a conflict in my schedule. And so I could either cancel today or I could do it by video. So I chose to do it by video, and I had the content ready. I'm excited about the content for you as we talk about creating checklists. It is a great performance tool. And so rather than miss today with you, I wanted to do it by video. And so you'll be getting a link to this from Kim. Kim is monitoring this, so you can send any emails you have to me about any questions, and I'll answer those for you later today. But I'm speaking today, and it was with a client for all week, and so I couldn't get it changed. So anyway, today we're going to be talking about creating checklists for project management success. Now, when we talk about checklists, most of us have participated by using checklists in a variety of ways. We have used them and been mandated to use them on different type of projects or different type of processes. And that's what we're talking about. But we're not talking about just having to use a checklist. We're going to talk about how to create checklists and what's the real benefit. Checklists are one of the simplest items to increase your productivity and your performance, and almost always consistently guarantee a certain outcome. And that's what we're looking for. So here's some of the benefits of a checklist. They can be short, simple. People can use them for early discovery of anything in the project. Progress is easy to measure. Items can be less forgettable. It reduces decision-making time because we're just going down the list of things to do. Also, work completed and work to do is visible to us because we see that we've already completed the first half of the checklist and we still have the second. And personal motivation comes with completion. So I don't know how you are, but I actually like checklists and lists because it allows me to feel like I'm making progress as I've marked off the first 5 or 6 type of items associated with that checklist. And so that really causes me to then look and see what else I have to do, and it allows me to feel some sense of accomplishment. Teams are more versatile by using checklists. Individuals and teams can gain more control because if I'm convinced my team members and my team are going to use the checklist, then I can lean back and realize that as long as they don't deviate from that checklist, they're going to get that desired outcome. Teams are working in the correct order to complete a current piece of work, and stakeholders can minimize their time in completing a current task, which saves valuable time. And the reason for this is because, and we're going to look at this a little deeper, but the reason for this is because we're taking in a checklist, you're taking people through the steps at the most efficient rate or most efficient process possible. And so that allows people to get from point A to point Z in the most efficient way possible. Now, you might say, well, there's a better way of doing it. Well, when that happens, you change your checklist. The process has changed, but maybe the checklist didn't change. So that's obviously something we have to look at. So let's look at a simplified checklist creation process, because the goal here is not just to say use checklists, even though that's something we probably are already doing. This is to how to create checklists for your project and different aspects of your project that's going to help with the output. So select a process, brainstorm the steps, and it's not just you brainstorming it, it would be you and your team would probably work better, or whoever understands that process of getting from what point you're at right now to where you want them to be. Order the steps in the logical sequence, create action statements, then we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Test the checklist a time or two, and you test it to see, does it take you through the proper steps? Is there anything we left out? And then adjust the checklist in case something has been left out. Then finalize the checklist and allow it now to become part of the fabric. And so in theory, and then of course you're going to train the people on the checklist. You think, well, they don't need training. It's only 7 checks. The point is that when people use checklists, the problem is not that the checklist is not correct and that it's not going to get them there more efficient. It's that people won't use it, or they'll do their own thing and then they fill out the checklist. And I'm sure that's never happened to any of you. Okay. But anyway, you're going to train people. But in theory, you would be able to take people through the various steps of the project or the various documents of the project that you want created for that particular project. And they should be able to have a checklist. So did you do this? Did you do this? And so forth. And they just follow it all the way through in the proper sequence. So really, what is a checklist? Just in case anybody has not caught on to what a checklist is, all of us have used it for something. Thomas Carter, or Thom Carter, a checklist and business process specialist, defined a checklist in 3 ways. He said a checklist can be items, tasks, or actions that need to be carried out. And so your checklist for a project might include any of those or all of those in that checklist. And so you might have separate checklists for different things, a checklist for tasks compared to the items or actions, which would be like, some of the administrative work needed with that project. And that's all okay. If that works for you, that's not a problem. But the point is that it's not always just the work itself. It could be some of the administrative stuff. Psychologist David Cohen believes that his struggle to stay organized is helped but not entirely solved by his to-do list. Now, he calls them a to-do list, but it's actually a checklist when you see it. And so he said that by using to-do lists, he said he uses them in his diary, and that he is constantly monitoring that to see what he needs to do next. He said, my family thinks I'm chaotic. He says, but I would be much more so without my list. He said, they've kept me in line for years. So I don't know how you are. Some people are automatically kind of wired for some of this. For an example, if I'm going out to run errands, I have a list of stuff, or I'll forget it, especially Walmart. Oh my gosh, just poke me in the eye. Walmart's terrible anyway, but I would absolutely get everything but what I went there for. And I'm sure you guys don't have that happen. And of course, it might be a senior moment, but I did it when I was 30 too, so I would miss everything. Cohen also said that he loves to do to-do lists, and he does it for 3 reasons. And so he said they dampen anxiety about the chaos of life, because we know it's in a list of something we need to do. Now he's creating his own to-do list or checklist to get through the day. And we're going to talk about daily lists. We're going to talk about process lists, and give you all different types of lists that you might be creating. I'm going to show you 2 different lists that I thought were really good as samples. They give us structure, they give us a plan, they are proof that what we've achieved that day, that week, that month. And so this is a very reassuring thing when you are completing some of the checklists. They're nothing more than an efficiency tool. Almost any consultant that's connected to checklists will call them an efficiency tool, because it removes doubt and it removes the process from us having to think about what are we going to do next, because the checklist is already created in an efficient manner and it's already placed into steps. We're just moving to the very next box that we need to take care of. So it helps create a process for those repetitive actions that we're going to be doing. So the purpose of a checklist is to increase compliance with the process, reduction in preventing a step. Information within the checklist can focus on an entire process, an activity, or an event, or on a daily work output. So it's not uncommon, and some of the efficiency experts say that they have checklists for all the different aspects of the project. Here's how you fill out here's the checklist for the charter. Here's a checklist for creating a plan. Here's a checklist for creating a communication plan. So you can see how we've drilled down in that a little bit with the different type of checklists. But it wasn't uncommon to find that project managers had a today checklist. And these are all the things that they had to get done today. So I would call that a task list, maybe a little more than a checklist. But if they're important and you're wanting to make sure they're done in a particular order and they have to be done today, then you can see how somebody would turn that into a checklist. Not anything wrong with that. That's going to be good. 50% of completed to-do items are done within a day. So that fits even with when you're talking about checklist. 50% will probably be done in a day or two. 18% is normally done within an hour, and 10% might be done within a minute or two. And so the problem is not that these items are very large necessarily, even though some will be extremely large, and you'll find yourself having to break it down into multiple checklists to get something done, because you're doing it in stages for some of you. But the thing I think about a checklist that really does is that it takes it off of my head to keep from thinking about it. Because you find in the back of your head, you're thinking, oh, I've got to remember to make a phone call to the sponsor. I've got to remember to send an email and get that report updated because the PMO needs it. Oh, I've got a meeting next week with the PMO to show them what's happening on these 3 projects. See, we have all that stuff happening in our head. And what happens is that the more projects you run and the more things that you're responsible for, and it's happening all the time for you to be more responsible, it continues to expand in all of those particular areas. And you find yourself then starting to drop some things. So here's some symptoms that let you know that a checklist might be needed, okay? So the first thing is, missing steps to accomplish an outcome. So we're trying to get to an outcome. We realize that we've missed 2 or 3 steps. Many of you know that I'm an assistant professor and I work with graduate students, and I'm a doctoral chair. The doctoral program has a guide for people to go through. That guide is essentially a checklist of here's what you need to do for this piece of the dissertation, and here's what you need to do for this piece of the dissertation. And so when you start seeing students who are missing components of that outline or components of those steps, you start realizing they're not reading the guide. And so a big emphasis has been placed on getting people to go back and read the guide. And then of course, even professors in grading them, I've done it too. I've not gone back to the guide to look at this 3 or 4 components that's supposed to be in that section. I've missed it. And then when we sent it on to a program assistant or someone to take a look at it, they kicked it back for that. Well, that was on me. I didn't follow the same guide that the student did. I didn't catch it either. But we start noticing that we're missing a step, and that becomes an area that we need a checklist on. Second thing is people constantly missing different types of work. And so it literally gets down to where sometimes you're having to back up and redo stuff. And that's very frustrating, as you guys know, in a project setting. Many of you guys talk about this in class. And so it's so frustrating that somebody has, we're already over here executing and we haven't done a charter. We haven't even planned a plan. And so now all of a sudden we find out that we're having to go over here and start planning a plan. Third thing would be returning to do forgotten steps later. That is frustrating. And many times it takes more time because you're trying to piecemeal this thing together in order to do that. And then the fourth way that lets you know that you might need a checklist is you're overwhelmed. You feel overwhelmed. The people feel overwhelmed. You can see by working with your team, they're overwhelmed with all the stuff they're trying to do. Where if they had it in a list and a checklist to do different pieces of it, they would not be as overwhelmed, because that checklist, it becomes your secondary memory of being able to come up with these things. All right, so does speed increase by using a checklist? Most of your researchers will say, because it's a performance tool, that it does increase efficiency. Todd Snyder, he conducts coaching and research on performance. This is what he said that I thought was really good. Checklists make you faster. Your brain is not always functioning at peak capacity, but when it is create the checklist, because that's like storing up power to use later when you really need it. When you need to get through a routine task, having a simple checklist allows you to do it faster, because it reduces the mental load requiring for organizing your approach. So what's he saying? It causes everything to speed up. You're able to do these things because they're just second nature. And of course, we've all seen this happen with pilots in particular. Pilots do a checklist and being able to get the plane going and starting the engines. I started to say cranking up those engines. That's that old Tennessee wine coming out. So as they get ready to crank that engine, they've got a checklist to follow, and they treat it as second nature. What's the next thing on the checklist? Flip this switch, do this, and they just follow that process over and over again. Now, efficiency also in using a checklist continues even beyond just project management. Do you realize that hospitals have changed their whole culture in many cases to go to a checklist-driven kind of setting? And the reason is because it was saving lives. Hospitals decrease completion rates by 35%, death rates by 47% when using a checklist. Now, if you've been in the hospital and then you've seen some of this stuff happen. If you've not been, then you don't realize how really how detailed they are in following the process. They put, they've got the bands on your arms. I don't know if you know this, but man, they're going to ask you your name 14 times. When I was in for surgery this past year, as many of you know, with my legs getting hurt at Gramps Camp, I mean, every time they came in to do something and my name was given to them, they checked my band. They asked me if I knew what was wrong with me. I mean, and it just was almost comical. And even when I got down to surgery, the morning of surgery, they asked me if I knew which leg. And of course, they were operating on both legs. And I'm saying, my understanding is you're working on both of them. And the doctors started laughing. He said, you're absolutely right. And so the point is that it is increased efficiency, but they follow a checklist. Do you have these things, these events happen and fixed in that patient? Then they're ready to go to the next checklist. So also NASA uses a checklist. I thought this was really interesting. This is a quote from Demote on human reliability and the cost of doing business. And this is a quote from NASA. Thinking and action errors could be helpful with a checklist. Human error consistently reports 60 to 80% of all failures, accidents, and incidents are associated with human error. We forgot to do it. We didn't think about it. We thought we did it. All of those kind of things. And we've all done those kind of things. Have you ever backed out of your driveway without raising your garage door? I mean, I backed into a friend with him being right behind me. We were talking and said goodbye. I shut my door and put it in reverse and backed right into the front of him. And so, and he didn't have time to take 3 steps. So the thing is that we have these little events that happen to where we're not thinking clearly, maybe on a particular piece, or it doesn't seem like important information. So common human error, it rates somewhere between 70 and 80%. And so what's acceptable is usually around 1%. But think about how horrible 1% is in some cases. If 1% of the planes that are flying end up crashing, how horrible is that going to be because of human error? If 1% of the trains that are running today end up crashing because of human error, you think about it. If 1% of the surgeries crash because of human error, because you die because of human error, think how terrible that is. So 1%, even though it's an acceptable rate because you're looking for 99%, the point is there's still heartache and some bad things that can happen in these situations here. So this percentage has been this high for years. 70 to 80% of most things that go wrong is human error. We did something wrong. We did or forgot to do something. And so that's what you're having to look at. Now, here's a little background on the need for a checklist. Okay, Jessica Green, in her article called The Power of Checklists in the Workplace, said this. And she said, and she quoted Atul Ganaid, told the story of how the U.S. Army Corps was able to make the use of Boeing aircraft that after a crash during its maiden flight was deemed too much airplane for one person to fly. The solution to flying the unflyable craft, it would be the pilot's checklist. Now, she wrote about this in 2007, and the one piece that was a little fuzzy on me was this the beginning of the checklist, that checklist era. Now, obviously, it's been going on far beyond 2007, but was this part of that historical component of creating a checklist because the planes were getting more complicated? But my point is that you see pilots doing this, and the bigger the planes, and they have additional checklists, they have emergency checklists. They're having to land without wheels. They have a checklist. If they're landing in water, they have a checklist. All of these things people have tried to think those through and brainstorm what those steps would be. Now, industries that use checklists, sometimes, even though we're talking about it here from the aspect of project management, we think, well, it's just our IT projects or our construction projects use checklists. Checklists are used across the board. Some are better than others. Obviously, we know that. And if you've ever had to use a checklist that was absolutely stupid and was wrong, then that's what we're talking about. That's what we don't want to have happen. That means that somebody had a checklist and it was probably right at one time, and then all of a sudden that checklist ended up they changed the process and changed the flow of work, and now that checklist is still the way it is, so that nobody updated it. Researchers use checklists. I'm going to show you a sample a little bit later that is a writing checklist. And so researchers will follow a checklist. Retail managers, restaurant managers, pilots, service providers, power plant personnel to have a gazillion checklists. And we want them to because it is devastating if they miss something. Inspectors, auditors, maintenance personnel, equipment and machinery installers, Space Force, they all follow checklists. And these people have learned that it is important to do that checklist, and you get it to a point to where that checklist just becomes second nature to these industries and to these people. Now, checklist reduces human error, and they have seen this happen regardless of what the checklist is for. So if it can reduce human error in a pilot taking off a plane with all the additional equipment that's there, if it can reduce for NASA errors in trying to send someone to the moon or send something up into space, it will reduce some of the errors that we see. That's just silly, foolish stuff that we have happen on our projects. So human error is a challenge regardless of whether it's running equipment, flying a plane, or doing some other sort of work. Human error is a negative action that hurts the product, the process, or did not follow the rules of the organization or industry. So in other words, we didn't follow the best practice. Now, I'm introducing the word best practice here, not because it's in this piece of narrative, but because that's usually what we are doing. We are building our checklist based on the best practice, at least for that organization, or for that part of the process for that organization. So it might not be the intent of a person, but it's going to happen. We're going to miss something. We're going to forget something. We're going to not put something in. So checklists, if they do reduce error, and that's what people believe, and that's what the researchers have shown. Even Dr. Michael Sinbald of Toronto Western Hospital hospital. This is what he said, going back to the hospital example. Checklists are commonly proposed tools to reduce error. However, when applied by experts, checklists have the potential to increase cognitive load and result in expertise reversal. And so what you're looking at a lot of times is, okay, who created the checklist? And so we could take a group of SMEs to create each of the checklists in our project. And as you're handing it off to someone who's less experienced, you're really going to benefit that person because the checklist which was created by experts in the field, if they're doing that checklist and they're taking the steps that the experts think they should be taking, that's going to be beneficial for that project. You don't have enough SMEs to run everything, nor do you really want them to, but you might use your SMEs and your subject matter experts to create the checklist. And then people who have less experience and less and maybe less education in that area are going to have the opportunity to be able to follow that. Processes are supported by checklists. How do we have to do it to jump through the hoops in our organization? Internal organizational processes are critical for sustained success. Checklists are customizable to the internal processes. Every organization, regardless of who you are, and usually on our webinars, we'll probably have 70 to 80 who are here, and then we normally will have 300 or 400 who will watch this. So let's say there's 400 companies watching this. You have the ability to customize a checklist for that project or even that process that you're only using for that one time with your people going through if you needed to. They're sometimes frowned on by creative groups. They feel like it puts them in a box, but you're not trying to use the checklist over here with the creative group, even though you probably could to spur people on in creativity with some things and surrounding them with a cocoon to be able to work. But checklists are normally done for repetitive actions. They're normally done for those things that other people are going to be following behind us having to do. So keeping them, it's going to help you with project success because most organizations have a tendency to do the projects in a very similar fashion. And so they run that project in a similar way over and over again. Now, main usage of checklists. The first would be to follow established processes. Most of us have been exposed to this. Manufacturing has done this for years. They want you to do this in 5 simple steps. That's what the checklist calls for. And boom, 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 that's what you do. It verifies that all material or data arrived. I'm doing this week while I'm missing and not able to be with you live. It's because I'm doing 5 days with American Management Association. And so American Management Association out of New York has asked me to do a project management seminar for them for 5 days. And so in doing that, one of the things that supports us was I got a checklist of materials that they sent me, they wanted me to teach for them. So following established processes or steps, verifying the material or the data has arrived, conducting inspections and audits. Boy, if you get into the quality people and the performance people who are doing the inspections and the audits, many times you have a checklist and a half of what you're filling out to be able to verify that that product is coming out and looking the way you want to look. And then collect correct data for analysis. In other words, what data do we need to be able to know how we're performing? If you're in monitoring, controlling your project, you're going to be looking for certain types of data and analysis. If you're working on the Scrum side, you're going to be looking at your burn down and burn up charts of the features or the user stories or the story points that people are producing in each sprint or iteration. So you're going to be using some of these different pieces. Tips on creating the checklist. Creating a checklist focuses on placing the steps a person or process currently uses into a written form for others to follow. Now, the first thing that has to happen here is this process current? Many times people have a process that's documented, but people are doing it their own way. They're not following that process. This checklist is going to push people to follow the process the way it's been documented. So if this process is not right, if it's got downtime that shouldn't be there, if it's got busy work, and you guys know what I'm talking about, you look at processes all the time. First thing we need to do is fix the process, then come back with supporting it with the checklist, okay? They help optimize the current process or steps and allow the analysis when needing adjustments. Organizations that use checklists consistently reduce the blame of the personnel and examine the checklist when there's an error. And so, in other words, if somebody missed a step, as long as they followed that checklist, then they did what they were supposed to do. And so if there's a problem out here, then it was something other than the person. The person followed the steps, followed the proper process, and so now they're looking to see what else happened to that. Now, if the process is wrong or the process wasn't followed, see, that comes back to human error again. Crisis checklists give direction on the proper steps to follow when there's a crisis that's out of the normal process flow. So the normal process flow is for daily activities, daily things that we're doing and working on with an organization, okay? But then the flip side of that is going to be, okay, what happens if this happens? For an example, all of our retail, we have found out with all the tornadoes that have hit over the last several years, your retail people all have a emergency checklist for tornadoes. And so, like for an example, at the Joplin tornado, Wanda and I accidentally stopped in Joplin to send a proposal, and we ended up writing it out in a Panera bathroom, the women's bathroom at Panera's. And so I don't know what the criteria is for constructing the women's bathroom compared to the men's bathroom at Panera, but that's where they had everybody stay. And then as it got worse, they started moving people to the cooler. And so the cooler made more sense as far as the construction part of the cooler. I didn't get into the cooler. I'm not, I didn't want to be in that cooler stuck. But the women's restroom must have a higher quality than what the men's restroom is. I poke fun about that, but it was a horrible tornado that tore Joplin up years ago. Now, creating crisis checklists is a good thing, though. Let me go back to that situation in Joplin. In the Panera, we're in Panera. The manager came out and said there's a tornado headed. They moved us into the restroom, and the manager was on the phone with their regional manager who was watching the news, and they had a checklist that they were following. I mean, they did a wonderful job with this. And so that was a crisis checklist. And even the moving of people to the freezer because it got closer was another level of intensity on that checklist. So all of those were good. So even though I poked fun about the women's restroom being constructed with higher material, I guess, my point is that really they took control of it as much as they possibly could in that crisis. So then why do checklists not work? If checklists are so good on the efficiency, then why is it that nobody wants to do a checklist? Okay, so long checklists can overwhelm us. And there are checklists that will be just multiple page after page. And so it takes some adjustment and some customization to be able to realize that this is a 5-page checklist for this thing. But it's probably because that process or that event that you're working on is so important. People are not logical thinkers and think that they have a better way. And you see this in workplace. That's one of the big reasons why people fight against a checklist. Individuals feel the checklist is micromanaging them, and the truth is it is. It's causing us to take these steps because we have determined in that organization that these steps in this sequence is the best way. And then many think that checklists are tedious and they're not even needed in some situations. And you know what? They might even be right. But the challenge you get into is trying to turn it on and turn it off. These checklists are tedious. These are not. Now, the truth is that if you've got tedious checklists and you don't need them, then get rid of them. Maybe you don't. But you would think that a pilot who flies every day would know what switches to switch on the airplane too. But what's the risk of taking that away? That's going to be a piece of it right there, is what is the risk of taking that away. And also checklists do not allow someone to explain the more complex answers or issues. And that's absolutely true. But when you do come across those events, we should be bringing management in or a subject matter expert in to be able to help us with that in order to be able to take control of that that we're looking at. Now, there's some guidelines for writing a good checklist. Excuse me. The first is create measurable items. Whatever we're wanting someone to do, they've got to be able to know for sure that they've done this. We'll show you some samples in a moment. Make selections specific rather than general. The more general, the harder it is for people to know whether they've done it or not. Keep the list short as possible. Use action words to begin each sentence. We'll show you what we're talking about there in just a moment. Now, some different types of checklists I've already referred to. So let me kind of give you this list. You could have a daily checklist of things that you're needing to do, situational, process, interview checklist. Many of you have used that for years with your organization. Requirements checklist, audit checklist, project recovery checklist, a vendor checklist, redo, confirm checklist. Many of you have onboarding checklists when you have a new employee. Here's all the stuff you talk about. Here's all the things they need. They need a key, they need a computer, they need a sign in, they need an email. You know, we've got all that kind of stuff too. And that's what you're looking at. So let's look at some of these a little deeper and go a little deep dive into some of these. Daily checklists. This is a great tool for you. If you've been missing stuff and you're always finding yourself remembering at night what you should have done that day. This might be something you need to add to your routine. Daily checklists focus on finishing outcomes for that one day. They begin with a brain dump in the morning or the afternoon before. And so you look at several different things that you need to accomplish: the priority, the location, the time sequence, and you get those things in order. And then what happens is you, through the day, you just glance at your list and mark things off. You're always going to add stuff to that list. Of course you are, because you're walking down the hall and your manager is going to catch you and say something to you or give you something else that you're needing to do that day. And so obviously it's not going to stay the same all day. You're going to find yourself adjusting stuff, but the point is it's on a list that you're going to be able to look at, and you're not going to miss anything. Situational checklists focus on steps of action to resolve a specific problem or issue or create the desired outcome. Situational checklists are only used in instances which qualify. And so situational checklists mean if this happens, this is what we do. So most of the pilots probably don't spend a lot of time looking at checklists for landing an airplane in the water, because in many cases they might practice it. They might do it when they go for the simulator or different things like that, but they're not looking at the water landing every time they take off from one airport to fly to another airport. Why? Because it's only for those situations. Situational checklists focus on pre-problem usage before something happens, or post-problem to reduce the chances of making the problem any worse. And so you'll see those particular things happen. So situational checklists are going to be those things that what steps of action do we take when this event, this crisis event or problem event happens. Many of us have all seen problem checklists. And so they're, I'm sorry, I said problem, I meant process checklists. And because it follows us steps of action. So process checklists focus on reducing errors when following procedures or processes. We have to do these 5 steps. Reducing errors is critical for completing any work or moving through the various steps to deliver quality. Process checklists remove the actor from having to remember the various steps or the order of those steps. Now, in some cases, you might have a process that is a very loose process of what people need to do and what order they need to do them. My question would be, do you even need a checklist in that situation? But for those of you who have that process of those steps, that people have to follow those steps in one particular order, then that's what you're wanting desperately to do, is you're wanting to make sure that in doing that, that people are being able to then turn around and follow it in those precise steps. Let's go to the interview checklists. Interview checklists create both a process and a content backlog for the interviewer. And the reason is because we normally are asking specific questions in different topic areas when we're doing the interview. Interviews follow a consistent flow in process. They discuss the potential employee's experience, their background, education. Interview questions can be part of the checklist, which prevent the interviewer from forgetting to talk about all the job areas with each candidate. And so what you're really wanting to do is create an atmosphere where you're asking the same questions to the same candidates, and here was their response. And that's really what you're wanting to do. And that way it's squeaky clean why you hired one person over another. Interview checklists can show the how and what of the interview as well when you're going through this. Many of us have been exposed to this. And part of this, we know the reason why we've been exposed to it is for the legal side of it. But the point is, it helps with that process. Requirements gathering checklist. Maybe you've never used one for that, but it can absolutely be a great help. Requirements gathering is the foundation for the project scope. Requirements gathering needs to happen early in the project to verify the resources and scope are all known early. Requirements gathering helps gather information by using groups, one-on-one interviewing, analyzing the requirements. Now, many of us maybe your project is a very small project, and you're only having to talk to 1 or 2 people. It's a very family-oriented kind of organization. And maybe you don't need a requirements gathering checklist, but many of you I know are working on some monster projects. And so the requirements gathering checklist is going to be very important to make sure that you've talked to all the right people and all the right stakeholders. Nothing is much more worse than to be in the middle of the project and all of a sudden you discover there's a requirement that the customer is expecting that nobody had ended up saying, and it didn't get passed along to the project manager or to the project team. And so that's going to be very, very difficult. Some will have a requirements verification checklist. Requirements verification checklist helps guarantee all requirements follow the organizational guidelines for providing a requirement in the project scope. Requirements verification checklist focuses on the questions on measurable and achievable requirements. And so what this does, this takes it away from some of the loosey-goosey kind of requirements that we've all seen, where the customer says, well, I'll know what that requirement is, or I'll know if we reach it when I see it. And so what happens is you're trying to hit this gray area that the customer has in their head, and nobody wants that kind of requirement. So requirements verification, is this measurable? Is it agreed upon? Is this a requirement that we think that we can reach? All of those are some of the components with requirements verification. Audit checklists. I've already referred to people in quality and those who are doing audits. Audit checklists have a process that can be part of the checklist, or it can include sections of an audit. Auditing sections such as scope, evidence, data collection, results, any of those kind of things, you probably have a checklist or steps that you can follow. The checklist might make it quicker for you, and it also makes it easier for you to hand off to someone else so that they could do that same thing. Audits are customizable to specific areas, which might require an audit checklist for different sections of the project. So the auditing of the budget might be totally different than if you're auditing the schedule, and it might be totally different than if you're auditing quality, obviously, or the performance, consistent performance. Vendor compliance, you might have one to audit the vendor. Project recovery checklist that focuses on turning around a troubled project or a section of a troubled project. So project recovery checklist focuses on the processes, the assessments, the recovery plan. Any of those kind of things could be part of that. One of the things about a recovery checklist is when to go into the recovery plan. That would be a checklist that would be very situational, because your project's running great and then all of a sudden, boom, something happens. And now you need a recovery plan to be able to move into a new plan or a new part of a plan for a section of the project to get it back on track. Project recovery can also include a project recovery audit to verify the recovery plan caught the project up and is now ready to return the project team to the project team into normal project tracking. So this is assuming that the project recovery plan is only for a small section of that project. So let's say it's 8 weeks long. So you have a checklist of how to transition to that recovery plan, do the recovery plan, and then transition that project back over to the team. So that could be what your checklist verifies. The vendor checklist. Vendor checklist can include steps for vetting the vendor. Vetting checklist can include such items as reputation, financial stability, expertise, level of knowledge in a domain area. All of these things can be part of a checklist for someone to research or to check out on a vendor before you sign a contract with that vendor. If there's something wrong with that vendor, you want to know it ahead of time, not after you've signed that contract. So vendor checklist can also include a completion of work associated with a contract. Does the vendor follow protocol and all internal processes? I'll give you an example of where this was talked about a few years back in class. I was doing a PMP boot camp. One of our gentlemen in the class, he was a construction project manager, builds all these huge warehouses for cities, for them to allow, to have their businesses, their local businesses will rent them out, and local factories will rent these out. And so he builds these big, huge metal buildings. So they had a vendor who was not following protocol. And so they had already warned this vendor. And so this vendor was an electrician who didn't follow protocol. And so anyway, they had a fire and an explosion at one of the plants. And it was this vendor again. The vendor didn't follow protocol and was doing something, and it arced, and it was right beside these canisters, and they something caught on fire, but the canisters didn't blow up, because had they blown up, according to my person in the class, he said it would have killed 100 people working that day and would have leveled the entire metal building, which was, like this huge monstrous warehouse they were building for one of the local cities. And so he fired that vendor instantly because he wasn't following protocol. And it was a safety protocol too, but he wasn't following protocol and had already been warned. But then the person had done something even worse. So that's a good example of what you're talking about. Those checklists, and some of that has to be followed. There's also what's called a redo confirm checklist. Redo confirm checklist allows the team members to complete the work, verify that they're following the correct steps at the end. Redo confirm checklists are similar to what pilots use. They also allow the team to look at the list after the event to verify they follow they followed or completed all the necessary items on the list. So it just confirms that we've done what we're supposed to do, and that should cause us and give us an opportunity to get that situation going in the proper direction. Now, here's some guidelines for writing a good checklist. Is the checklist going to take a person through specific steps, or is it created as a reminder? That the motivation here is two different things. If it's going through specific steps, then it's going to be 1 through 15, and they have to do it in that order, and they have to understand why. If it's to be a reminder for certain things, then that's going to be a piece that might be a little bit softer approach in your checklist. So you want to keep the wording simple. Most of the researchers out there on creating checklists say that it needs to be written at a 5th grade level. You're going to use active wording rather than passive. Active wording is considered to be clear. I'm going to give you a list of some that we've seen on some checklists. You're going to use keywords in the checklist to avoid mistakes and avoid confusion. And one of the good things about these keywords is that these keywords can be very industry specific. Construction has some keywords that's a little different than IT, and that's okay. Not anything wrong with that. Now, maybe you are using a process checklist and they go through specific actions. They require a person or team to detail all the process steps moving from one step to another for a particular output. And so that can't be deviated against. And this is where best practice is going to help this in a tremendous way. Now, I want to show you a sample that I ran across that I thought was interesting. This is Kansas University. They gave a writing checklist. Now, this is to people who are writing, doing writing there. And so they're writing for specific audiences. And so this is a checklist on how to write better. And I thought, this is perfect. What a great example. So they've given you a little bit of narrative explaining what the checklist is. And then there's 4 of them. All copy is written with specific intended audience in mind. Copy uses words your audiences would use in conversation. Copy uses words your audience would use to search for the information. All copy add values for your intended audience. Now, this little checklist is more of a reminder to go back and look at what they had written and obviously make sure that they were following this. And so I thought this was a great, and it's a very soft type of checklist, but it's a great checklist. What a great example. Now, project startup checklist. The state of Kansas actually has a multi-page project startup checklist. It's an excellent checklist, but to someone who's not used to having a checklist, or to someone who's never seen a checklist and worked with one, it could seem very overwhelming. And if we look at it from the aspect of that's multiple pages, you might determine that you don't need it at all for any project unless you're doing what they call a keto project, which is one that's over $250,000 and above. But this checklist is really a conglomeration of smaller checklists that go all the way through the project. So this checklist could actually be broken apart and used in various sections of this. And so it is an excellent example to be able to look at. So in this project, is this project cost effective? Does it deliver high benefits or return on investment? Is risk containable with current resources? Will this project drive the current strategic vision and goals? Is the scope of work clear enough to document at a high level? Is there a project manager in the organization who has the ability to run it? All of these are excellent questions on that. Now, checklist for a WBS. So let's go a little specific here. Does the team understand the scope? Are there team members who have estimating experience? Can the team break down the work into a WBS for estimating? Did the WBS follow the 880 guideline? Does the team have an 80% confidence level in the estimate that was created? So great examples. And you notice how it's very precise, very specific. Metrics are in there to allow your team to be able to evaluate, are they meeting this or not? Now, State of Kansas quality checklist. This was from their startup checklist. And so this is the section on quality assurance. And so you'll notice that they've got several questions here on quality. Is there a quality assurance plan documented? Are the quality assurance functions and related roles and responsibilities clearly defined? Are completion or verification criteria defined for each task producing an output? Is there a process, test plan, inspection, review defined for verifying outputs for each task? Will tasks be marked complete only after internal QA has been successfully completed? Will there be a formal process for submitting, logging, tracking, and reporting of items undergoing QA throughout the submit, test, rework, submit, test cycle? Will statistics related to QA be collected and problems raised as issues? Will QA relate information, related information to be reported regularly as part of the status reporting mechanisms? Excellent questions associated with just the topic of quality assurance. Now let's go a little further here with efficiency and checklists. We've already heard that the performance experts believe that you're going to be much more efficient because you're going to be able to do things faster. So following checklists can seem like a brain dead activity if it's misunderstood. So it's not paperwork and doesn't need to be painted like that. The goal is efficiency and compliance without needing to think about the process or the next step. So you just follow those steps and do what it says at the moment it says it. So checklists create patterns and behaviors for success at every level and in all roles in business. And so if we follow the checklist and do what we're supposed to do at that moment, then it takes some of that thinking out of our head. Checklists reduce mistakes on the job because workers do not need to remember the steps perfectly, and workers who follow checklists reduce human errors, and they guarantee that the next step can happen because they're just following exactly what the document says. Now, the last piece of this was one that maybe you weren't as familiar with, the read, do, or read, confirm checklists. These have become very popular in a lot of different situations. So a read, do checklist focuses on actions that one must complete. The goal is action and to prevent one from having to follow something from memory. And so a read, confirm checklist focuses on confirming specific actions are complete and nothing was overlooked. And so you did all of these, everything's there and it's overlooked. If you've noticed it, your taxes actually use something like this if you do your own taxes. And so it will give you a checklist of what you should have with whatever it is you're going to be sending to the IRS. And so it tells you a list of those items. Now, when we look at this, so read, do, or read, confirm checklists, you would then look at read, do checklist or the read, confirm. And so if we look at the read, do, it looks like the actors must read the item and follow the checklist. No item is complete until it has been read. And then the read, confirm, actors can complete the action and then confirm they completed everything on the checklist. And so this is what has been built for pilots in particular. The active verbs that we were talking about, there's a lot of those. These are very common. I think I have 2 slides of these real quick. So develop, publish, move, research, create, design, apply, check, call, make, review, compile, rework, build, arrange, clean, deliver, prepare. All of these are active verbs. And so it's telling them to do something specific. Suggest, take, send, receive, record, provide, perform, begin, change, write, visit, explain, identify, measure, report. I think I've got report on there twice. I thought I'd already said that, but nevertheless, I want to give you a sampling of some that I had seen as I was reviewing and writing this webinar off of checklists that I had seen from other organizations. Now, you're not going to be able to ask questions because, like I said before in the beginning, that in full disclosure, I'm actually speaking someplace else today. But you can send me an email about any questions. I'll be glad to do that. But I do want to introduce you to a couple of things that's going to help you. Okay, so first off, next month, we're going to be talking about shifting authority, how PM authority shifts in different project structures. And so that's going to be on Friday, July 8th at 10 o'clock. So if you want to be part of that, you need to sign up on our website. The second thing I want to talk about is our last PMP virtual mastermind group of the year. And so we're going to do we've done these and many of you have heard about these. It's a free 5-day mastermind group. Participants spend about 1 hour a day filling out their application, getting everything, all their experience in line so that they can put it into an application. They've got some videos to help them kind of understand what they're facing with the new PMP test. This is aligned with the PMP test for January of 2021. This is aligned with the new material that PMI has written and come out with. So you get a lot of these. You'll also take 25 questions that week from PMI that we purchased from them that are similar to your PMP test. You'll have videos on different aspects of it. I did 2 Zoom calls to answer any questions that week. And then we also give away one free scholarship. So one person wins a free boot camp who's there. I think our last class had 138 people in it. And so I'd love to have some of your people in it, and this will benefit them greatly to be able to jump them through the hoops. Plus they get 5 contact hours for this. And so that will be September, and so they can sign up for that. The last thing I want to talk about here is our webinar plus. Now, you guys have been participating in our webinars. In December, it'll be 3 years that we've been doing these every month. And so we are starting in August, and so August will kick off a new piece to this. And so this is something that will change a little bit for you. At the end of December, that will be the end of our 3-year project management curriculum. And so we have devised the curriculum. And so we have been teaching that curriculum for 3 years. In August, we are kicking off an addition to this. And so you're going to have the video, just like what you're doing right now. But we have been hearing from people who are trying to do some of this with training their people. And so we have just kind of reformatted this. So here's what we're going to do. In August, we're calling it Webinar Plus. And so that's Webinar Plus Study Notes is really what it is. And so you're going to get the topic, whatever the topic is, which is the 1-hour video, just like what everybody's gotten for 3 years. But in addition, you're going to have a PDF. The PDF is going to be a handout. It's going to show part of an outline, and then it's going to give you 3 to 4 discussion questions about that topic. And the purpose behind this is so that you can start having meetings with your people and training them with some of this material. And so in other words, in theory, you'd have a 1-hour meeting. I'll show you a sample, and this is a draft. It's not finished yet, but it will be by August. And so anyway, everybody who signs up for a webinar, this is how it's going to be changing. So you'll get a PDF, it'll have an outline, 3 questions in it. You can copy those, hand it out to your people. And then also you can show the video and do a 1-hour meeting and use this the next year to be able to train your people in 12 different topics with project management. So how do you use the Webinar Plus? You're going to use it to build skills, to creating methodology discussions on can we do our projects in a different manner that's going to be better. The people that you have, if they already have a PMI certification, you're going to get 1 hour. They'll get an hour of PDUs from this. And so this is all free. None of this is going to cost you anything. And then it's going to support those staff meetings. And so this is a tool that we've decided that we can support you in your staff meetings to be able to pass on to your people. And that's just something for being one of our companies that's been with us through our webinars and using us and those type of things. Now, new courses that we have out, and so this is available right now. We have a 2-day hybrid project management class, and so I finished writing that earlier this year. I'm excited about it. I'm doing it in DC this month, and so I'm excited about this. But if you're interested in this, we're looking at both traditional and agile. For those of you who are using different types of kind of that blended hybrid kind of approach, this allows you to look at some other things to be able to support that approach. And so I'd love to do it on site. We can do it virtual as well, but I've got openings from July on. August on actually is really what I have now. I know the slide says June, but June, July, and most of August is starting to book up. So from August on, we still have some openings that we can work that in. And then the last thing, we still have some boot camps this year for the PMP. We have August boot camp, October, and then December. So we still have 3 boot camps that you can be part of, and we'd love to have you be part of that. So I'm at the end of the time. So let me thank you so much for being part of this. And I apologize for having to do it with a video, but I didn't want you to miss the information. So I hope the information has been great for you. And so I'll see you next month live again. Okay. So bye everyone. Thank you for being here.